The vast galactic empire, known for its military might and unparalleled technology, had been expanding across the galaxy for centuries. No enemy had ever posed a real threat. Their fleet moved like a well-oiled machine, a terrifying symbol of power and control. Led by the imperious flagship, the Empire crushed one civilization after another, absorbing them into their sprawling territories. Now they had reached the outer rim of the galaxy, where the unknown awaited. Their sensors picked up an unusual signal. It wasn't a distress call or a warning, or even an alien language. It was laughter, a strange, almost unsettling noise that echoed through the vacuum of space. The Empire's commanders looked at the readings with curiosity and confusion. Was this some kind of trick, a test, or perhaps a malfunction in their equipment? But they were sure of one thing: whatever it wasn't worth their attention. They were about to enter a system rich with resources ripe for the taking, and the last thing they wanted was to be distracted by a joke or some strange alien ritual. But the signal grew louder and more distinct as they approached the source. The laughter wasn't just a static noise. It was a full broadcast, clearly organized, coming from the fleet of human ships that had appeared on the edge of the system. The Empire officers exchanged uncertain glances. Humans were nothing more than primitive beings, a species barely out of their Stone Age. They had no reason to be concerned. Humanity was a minor civilization, at best barely even a footnote in the galaxy's history. But the laughter was different. It was like a challenge, and the Empire never backed down from a challenge. The fleet of human ships was unlike anything the Empire had ever seen. Their ships were smaller, outdated, and seemed completely out of place in comparison to the Empire's massive battle cruisers. But the humans had something that caught the attention of the Empire's fleet, something unexpected and entirely baffling. They didn't seem afraid at all, despite being outgunned and outmatched. They continued to broadcast nothing but laughter, jokes, and even the occasional punchline, like a strange game was being played. Captain Rathan, commander of the flagship, the Imperious, couldn't understand it. He ordered his crew to increase speed and close the distance quickly. Soon they would reach the heart of the human fleet and deal with this oddity once and for all. But before he could issue any further commands, a message was transmitted directly to his ship. It was from humanity. A simple text message accompanied by a strange image. It read, "Ready for a friendly game of tag," and displayed a comical cartoon of a human running away from a spaceship. Rathan stared at the message, unable to comprehend the meaning of it. Was this some form of communication, or just an elaborate prank? Either way, the Empire's superiority was unquestionable, and these humans would soon learn their place. He instructed his fleet to engage and prepare to crush the human vessels in one swift move. But as the fleet moved into position, Captain Rathan couldn't shake the feeling that there was something wrong, something more dangerous than he could see, hidden behind the bizarre humor and the ridiculous broadcasts. As if the humans weren't afraid at all, they were ready for something different. As the Empire's fleet approached the human ships, the tension was thick in the air. Captain Rathan stood on the bridge of the Imperious, his eyes fixed on the strange little vessels. Before him, the human ships were scattered in formation like a random pattern of stars in the sky. Yet they moved together with uncanny precision. Rathan could not understand it. The ships were small, fragile, compared to the Empire's mighty cruisers, and yet they seemed to be coordinating in a way that defied logic. The laughter still echoed across the communication channels. At first it had been a curious background noise, but now it was growing louder and more persistent, almost mocking. It wasn't the sound of fear or desperation. It was something else, something playful, as if the humans were enjoying this absurd encounter more than the Empire's fleet ever could. Rathan ordered his fleet to open fire on the nearest human ship, expecting the small vessel to disintegrate under the power of their advanced weaponry. He watched with smug satisfaction as the first volley of energy blasts surged through space toward the human ship, but instead of striking the ship dead on the blast, seemed to curve around it, as though the vessel was dodging the attack in the most ridiculous way possible. It was an impossible maneuver, one that no ship should be able to perform. The human ship seemed to twist and turn with an agility that made no sense at all. It darted and danced like a leaf caught in the wind, narrowly avoiding every shot the Empire fired. It was as if the ship was not following any logical pattern, but instead moving in a way that could only be described as absurdly playful. Rathan's jaw clenched in disbelief and frustration. How could this be happening? How were they doing this? His officers scrambled to make sense of it. One of them suggested it was a trick, some sort of illusion or a glitch in their targeting systems, but another officer pointed out that the same impossible dodging was happening across the entire human fleet. Every shot the Empire fired missed its mark by an inch or more, and the humans continued to laugh in the background like it was all part of some grand game. Rathan was growing furious. This was not a fight, this was an insult. The humans weren't just resisting, they were mocking the Empire, and worse still, they were doing it with a kind of absurd confidence that rattled the crew. The Empire's might was being toyed with, and it was a humiliation that none of them could endure. The flagship's weapons systems were recalibrated, and Rathan ordered another barrage of firepower aimed directly at the human ships. This time, he was certain they would hit their target. But once again, the human ships danced through the void, weaving in and out of the laser fire, as though it was nothing more than a game of tag. And then something strange happened as the human ships continued to dodge the Empire's fire. One of them released a massive hologram into the void. It was a giant rubber chicken floating serenely through space, with a flashing neon sign that read, "Catch me if you can." The Empire's gunners froze for a moment, staring at the ridiculous sight. As the human fleet continued their wild evasions, laughter filled the airwaves again, and Rathan stood there utterly stunned. What kind of enemy were they facing? Could it be possible that these humans were so confident that they had resorted to nothing less than mocking the Empire itself? The moment stretched on. The human ships continued to dodge and weave, and the Empire's fleet seemed to grow more and more disoriented with each passing second. The laughter rang louder across the comms, and for the first time in Rathan's long career, he began to wonder if they were not the ones who were in control of the situation. The Empire's flagship, the Imperius, was on the verge of panic. Its crew could not comprehend what was happening. The human ships kept dodging and weaving, as if the laws of physics had been twisted into some bizarre mockery of reality. Captain, Rathan clenched his fists in frustration. How could this be happening? Their technology was superior, their tactics flawless, and yet they were being made fools of by these tiny ships with their ridiculous antics and incessant laughter. The Empire's fleet had already launched multiple salvos at the human ships, each attack more powerful than the last, and each one missed its mark by what seemed to be an impossible margin. The humans didn't seem to be making evasive maneuvers. They were simply reacting to the attacks in a way that defied any sense of military logic. They would spin wildly at the last second, twist, and turn like acrobats in the void of space. It was as if they were dancing, not fighting. The Empire's military tactics had no effect at all. Rathan's officers were starting to lose their composure. It was unheard of to see a fleet this disorganized and uncoordinated. Against the Empire's might, the human ships weren't even firing back. They were just dodging and laughing in the process. The Empire's flagship shook as another blast missed by mere inches. The crew muttered in disbelief. One of the bridge officers suggested they switch to heavier firepower, but Rathan snapped back. It wouldn't matter. Nothing they did would work against these unpredictable enemies. With every failed attack, the humans' confidence seemed to grow stronger. It was almost as if they were enjoying the chaos they had created in the Empire's ranks, and it was contagious. The more Rathan watched, the more ridiculous it seemed. How could such small ships with such odd tactics be a real threat to the Empire's superiority? Just as he was about to order another bombardment, the humans sent a transmission. It was just a single message this time. It wasn't a joke or a laugh track. It was simply a text that read, "How's your aim? We're just getting started." Rathan's heart sank at the casual tone of the message. The humans were openly mocking the Empire now, as if the entire conflict was nothing more than a game to them. They weren't afraid, they weren't desperate, they were enjoying themselves. And in that moment, Rathan realized just how much control the humans had gained over the situation. It wasn't just about the fleet anymore. It was about something deeper, something far more unsettling. They were turning the Empire's own might into a joke. The Imperious commander ordered a full offensive. He wasn't going to be made a laughingstock any longer. The flagship released a barrage of its most powerful weaponry, aimed directly at the largest human ship. But as the blasts rocketed toward their target, the human ship did something even more absurd. It didn't dodge, it didn't move, it simply deployed a massive inflatable balloon shaped like a duck and let it drift lazily in front of the blast. The energy beam hit the balloon instead of the ship, and in an instant the entire fleet watched as the beam harmlessly bounced off the rubber duck and dissipated into space. Rathan could only watch in stunned silence. The humans had turned their ship into a floating joke, a rubber duck blocking their deadliest weapon, and once again the laughter echoed across the galaxy. Rathan wanted to scream, he wanted to strike back with all the power of the Empire, but he couldn't bring himself to do it, because he knew deep down that no matter how many ships they threw at these humans, no matter how many lasers they fired, nothing would ever work against the sheer absurdity of their approach. The Empire was losing, and they didn't even know why. The Empire fleet was in complete chaos by this point. The human ships continued their wild dodging, their unpredictable maneuvers were impossible to track, and even more impossible to counter. The Empire's most advanced targeting systems could barely get a lock on the tiny human vessels, and even when they did, their blasts missed by miles. The crew of the Imperious was in a state of panic. The Empire had never faced an opponent like this before. It was like fighting shadows that laughed in the face of their weapons. The Empire's fleet tried everything they could think of: more focused fire, more precise targeting, more rapid engagement, but nothing worked. Rathan stood on the bridge of the Imperious, his mind racing with plans and counterplans, but nothing seemed to make sense. The human ships weren't fighting back in the traditional sense. They weren't trying to destroy the Empire's fleet. They weren't even trying to win. They were just dodging and laughing and playing some game that the Empire couldn't understand. And then it happened again. The humans sent another transmission. This one was different, though it wasn't a message. It was something far more absurd. It was a hologram of a giant whoopee cushion that floated directly in front of the flagship. The human ships were still dodging and weaving, and the hologram made the whole scene even more surreal. But what shocked the Empire's crew was that as the whoopee cushion hovered in space, it made an impossibly loud fart sound that echoed across the fleet's comms. The Empire officers stared in disbelief. Some of them actually began to chuckle despite themselves. Rathan's face burned with embarrassment. He was furious. How could this be happening? How could an entire fleet of supposedly professional soldiers be reduced to this utter nonsense? The humans were mocking them, not with weapons, not with military strategy, but with comedy. The laughter grew louder across the communication channels. Now it was a mix of human voices and the sounds of comedy sketches, mixed with obnoxious sound effects. The Empire's crew members were still struggling to stay focused, but the laughter was contagious. They couldn't help but snicker at the sheer absurdity of it all. Even the most hardened soldiers of the Empire began to crack under the pressure. The humiliation was too much to bear. Rathan slammed his fist on the console. This was no longer about strategy or victory. It was about pride. The Empire could not allow itself to be made a joke in front of the entire galaxy. The reputation of their fleet was at stake. He turned to his officers and barked orders to fire once again, this time with everything they had. But as he gave the command, something unexpected happened. Instead of firing in unison, as they always had, the Empire's ships began to fire erratically, one after another, completely out of sync with each other. It was as if the Empire itself was falling apart at the seams. Their weapons fired wildly in all directions, some of them hitting their own ships, some of them missing entirely. It was a disaster. The human ships, meanwhile, were still dodging and weaving effortlessly, mocking the Empire's every move. The laughter from the humans grew louder and louder, filling the communication channels. It echoed through the Empire's fleet like a tidal wave of humor, washing away all sense of order. The Empire's military might seemed powerless against it. Rathan could hardly believe what was happening. His fleet was in total disarray. They weren't losing a battle, they were losing their dignity. The human fleet had turned the Empire's greatest strength into its greatest weakness, and Rathan realized in that moment that he wasn't facing an enemy who wanted to conquer the galaxy. He was facing an enemy that wanted to show everyone how ridiculous the Empire really was. The Empire's fleet was now in complete disarray as the human ships continued their ridiculous evasions. The once pristine and intimidating ships of the Empire were now firing in all directions, some shots missing their targets by light years, while others struck their own vessels by accident. Rathan stood in stunned silence as his fleet fell apart before him. It was as if the very idea of military discipline had been turned into a joke. The humans had successfully undermined the Empire's sense of order and control, and with every laugh that echoed across the comms, the Empire's power seemed to slip further away. Rathan gripped the arms of his chair in frustration. What were they supposed to do? How could they fight an enemy that refused to take them seriously? The Empire had faced countless battles, but none like this. The human fleet was a constant reminder that there was no way to predict what they would do next. One moment they were dodging blasts, the next they were sending holograms of inflatable ducks or whoopee cushions floating through space. It was chaos, pure and simple. The Empire's commanders were scrambling to regain control of the situation. Their tactics were failing, their weapons were useless, and their pride was shattered every time they tried to organize a counterattack. It was as if the humans were one step ahead, ready to make a mockery of everything they did. The laughter had become deafening by now, and it was starting to break the morale of the Empire's crew members. Some of the soldiers were laughing in spite of themselves. Others were angrily pounding on their consoles, trying to regain some semblance of focus. But nothing worked. The humans had turned the Empire's own sense of superiority against them. Rathan knew he had to do something drastic, but the more he thought about it, the more impossible it seemed. How could they fight against an enemy that wasn't interested in winning in the traditional sense? The humans were playing a game with them, and they were enjoying every minute of it. They didn't care about taking control of the galaxy or destroying the Empire's fleet. They only cared about making them look foolish, and so far they were succeeding brilliantly. And then it happened. The human fleet sent another transmission. This time, it wasn't a message or a joke. It was a full-scale holographic performance. A giant human face appeared on the comm screen with a wide, goofy grin. The human face began to speak in an exaggerated voice that sounded like a cartoon character. "Hey there, space invaders, we hope you're enjoying the show." The voice was accompanied by the sound of applause, and the laughter that had been echoing through the galaxy grew louder. The entire fleet of human ships began to rotate in unison, performing an intricate and ridiculous dance routine in space, their ships twirling and flipping in time to an unseen beat. Rathan's jaw clenched as he watched this absurd performance unfold. It was like the humans were mocking everything the Empire stood for. The idea of order, discipline, and control was being torn apart by the sheer ridiculousness of the human display. The Empire's ships were caught in a strange paralysis. Some officers were frozen in disbelief, while others began to crack a smile despite their best efforts to remain stern and professional. The laughter from the human fleet was too much. It was contagious. It was maddening. As Rathan stared at the holographic performance, he realized something that shook him to his core. The Empire wasn't just losing a battle, it was losing something much more important. It was losing its place in the galaxy as a force to be feared and respected, and the humans were doing it with nothing more than humor and the sheer power of ridiculousness. The Empire was being defeated not by might, but by laughter, and Rathan had no idea how to fight back against that. The Empire fleet was on the brink of collapse. The once powerful ships that had conquered galaxies were now completely out of sync with one another. The human ships still danced and dodged through the void, as if they were part of a game, and the Empire was just another target in their amusement. Rathan stood in the center of the chaos, his mind reeling from the sheer absurdity of it all. How had things gone so wrong? The humans had no chance against the Empire's might, and yet here they were making a mockery of everything the Empire had built. It was no longer a battle of weapons or tactics. It had become something entirely different. The Empire had always relied on its strength, its technology, and its precision, but now those very qualities seemed to have become its weaknesses. The human fleet wasn't fighting by the same rules. It wasn't following any logic that the Empire understood. It was like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. Every time the Empire thought it had a lock on the enemy, they slipped through their fingers. The humans had turned the tables in a way no one could have predicted. The laughter from the human fleet continued to reverberate through the Empire's communications channels. It was unrelenting, and every time it echoed across the void, it reminded the Empire of its growing humiliation. The laughter wasn't just a sound, it was a force that seemed to seep into the very fabric of the Empire's resolve. It was breaking them down piece by piece. The soldiers, the officers, the commanders, all of them were being worn down by the relentless sound of joy and mockery. Rathan's fingers twitched as he watched the human ships continue their unpredictable maneuvers. It was like they were mocking not only the Empire's military prowess, but also its very sense of order and control. The humans had taken everything the Empire stood for and turned it into a joke, and with every passing moment, the Empire seemed less like an unstoppable force and more like a caricature of its former self. Just when Rathan thought it couldn't get any worse, another transmission came through this time. It was a simple image, no words, just an image that made Rathan's blood run cold. It was a drawing of the Empire's flagship, the Imperius, but it had been altered in the most ridiculous way. The ship was drawn as a giant rubber chicken, with lasers shooting out of its eyes, and a smiling face drawn on its hull. The caption underneath read, "The Might of the Imperius." Rathan's fists clenched so hard his knuckles turned white. The image was a slap in the face. It was a reminder that the humans weren't just laughing at them. They were reducing the Empire to nothing more than a cartoon, a joke that no one could take seriously anymore. The Imperius had once been the pride of the Empire, its symbol of dominance and power, but now it had been reduced to this absurdity. He slammed his fist onto the console. The humiliation was unbearable. But even worse was the creeping realization that the Empire had no idea how to stop it. The human fleet wasn't just evading their attacks, it was dismantling the Empire's entire sense of superiority piece by piece. And then something strange happened. The laughter began to quiet down, not because it had stopped, but because it had shifted. It wasn't just mockery anymore. It was something else, something that the Empire had never expected. It was the sound of the humans celebrating their victory, not in the form of explosions or tactical brilliance, but in the sheer joy of proving that the Empire could be made to look like fools. Rathan felt his resolve falter as the sound of the humans' laughter grew quieter. It wasn't an ending, it was just the beginning. The Empire's fleet was no longer a unified force. It was a disjointed mess. Ships drifted aimlessly, some still trying to fire their weapons, but missing completely, while others were beginning to turn back toward the edges of the system. Unsure of what to do next, the human ships continued their unpredictable and utterly absurd movements, weaving in and out of the chaos. They were like children playing a game of tag, while the Empire's once powerful ships were left floundering in the vacuum of space, like a predator that had forgotten how to hunt. The laughter continued to ring out from the human fleet, as if mocking the very idea of war itself. Rathan paced back and forth on the bridge of the Imperius, his hands gripping the edge of the command console so tightly his knuckles were white. He couldn't believe what was happening. The Empire had never been defeated in this way. No enemy had ever so completely stripped them of their dignity. It was one thing to lose a battle, but it was another entirely to be made a laughingstock in front of the entire galaxy. The Empire had built its entire reputation on its strength and its control, but now that reputation was in tatters, reduced to a joke by a fleet of human ships that shouldn't have even been able to last this long. The crew of the Imperius was on edge. Some of them had already started to crack under the pressure. Their usual calm and composure had been replaced with nervous glances and uncomfortable silence. Others were starting to laugh along with the humans, as if they had lost all hope of ever reclaiming control. The Empire's officers whispered amongst themselves about abandoning the mission, about retreating from the system, before their humiliation became even more complete. But Rathan could not allow that. He would not go down like this. The Empire would never surrender, not to these ridiculous creatures. He slammed his fist onto the console and issued another order to his fleet to attack once again, this time with everything they had. But as soon as the command was given, the human fleet did something even more outrageous. They deployed a massive hologram of a giant floating banana peel right in front of the flagship. It was so large that it blocked the view of the Imperius, and as the Empire's ships opened fire, the lasers bounced harmlessly off the hologram and scattered in all directions. Rathan's face turned red with anger as his own fleet's weapons fire missed their targets by miles. The human ships were still dodging and weaving effortlessly, as though the entire battle was a performance, and the Empire was nothing more than a background prop. The hologram of the banana peel slowly began to drift toward the fleet, as if mocking the Empire's inability to hit a single target, and for the first time in his career Rathan felt completely helpless. It was as though the Empire's entire might had been reduced to nothing more than a spectacle for the amusement of the humans. And then the worst part happened. As the hologram of the banana peel floated toward the fleet, the humans began to sing over the comms. They were singing a childish song with lyrics that didn't make any sense at all. The melody was upbeat and absurd. The lyrics were nothing more than silly rhymes about bananas and flying pigs. The humans were celebrating their victory not with weapons or battles, but with the most ridiculous thing they could possibly do. Rathan could feel his pride slipping away with every note that rang through the comms. The Empire had been reduced to a joke, not by force of arms, but by the sheer ridiculousness of the humans' approach. It was humiliating, it was maddening, and it was all he could do to keep from screaming in frustration. But even as the Empire's fleet faltered, something deep inside Rathan's mind began to shift. Was this truly defeat? Or was this something else, something more dangerous? The Empire was on the edge of collapse. It wasn't the strength of the human ships that was defeating them, but the absurdity of it. The human fleet continued to perform its unpredictable dance, its ships twisting and dodging like acrobats in the vast emptiness of space. The holograms and absurd sound effects seemed to make a mockery of everything. The Empire had stood for. The once invincible fleet was now a laughingstock, and there was nothing Rathan could do to stop it. As the human fleet continued its nonsensical maneuvers, the laughter from their comms echoed in the void. It was relentless. It was a reminder that the Empire had been reduced to nothing more than a punchline in a galactic joke. The human ships were still dodging every shot, still sending absurd transmissions, taunting the Empire with their playful mockery. And with every laugh, the Empire's resolve weakened. Rathan could feel the weight of their failure settling in like a heavy burden. But there was something else too, something deep within him that refused to accept defeat. It was pride. It was the same pride that had driven the Empire to conquer countless worlds and build an empire that spanned the stars. And as he stood there on the bridge of the Imperius, watching the humans mock them with their ridiculous antics, something inside him snapped. This wasn't just a fight for control of the galaxy anymore. It was a fight for their dignity, for the very soul of the Empire itself. Rathan turned to his officers with fire in his eyes. He would not allow the Empire to be made a fool of any longer. He would find a way to fight back, even if it meant fighting against the very absurdity that had brought them to this point. He ordered the fleet to take a different approach. They wouldn't fight with weapons or tactics. They would fight with something else, something that the humans hadn't seen yet, something that would restore the Empire's honor. As the fleet began to shift into formation, Rathan gave the command to launch their new strategy. It wasn't about overpowering the humans. It was about one thing, and one thing only: proving that the Empire could still outclass them. In the most unexpected way, the ships of the Empire began to move, not in perfect precision, but with a strange elegance, a slow, graceful ballet that seemed almost too perfect. It was as though they had given up trying to hit the human ships, and instead had turned their focus on creating something beautiful, something that made the human antics look childish in comparison. The human fleet paused for a moment. They had been so focused on making a mockery of the Empire that they hadn't expected to see something like this. They watched in stunned silence as the Empire's fleet danced through the stars, their ships moving in perfect harmony with one another, creating swirling patterns of light and color in the vastness of space. It was mesmerizing, it was beautiful, and for the first time the humans stopped laughing. Rathan watched from the bridge of the Imperius as the human fleet seemed to hesitate. They had never expected this from the Empire. They had expected more absurdity, more chaos, but instead the Empire had shown them something that they had not counted on: beauty, elegance, control in a way the humans couldn't match. For just a moment, the humans were silent, their laughter gone. And in that moment, Rathan felt a spark of hope. Maybe they hadn't lost after all. Maybe the Empire still had something that the humans could never take from them. But just as quickly as the moment arrived, it vanished. The human fleet began to laugh again, only this time it wasn't mocking, it wasn't mean-spirited, it was pure joy. It was as if they had realized something the Empire hadn't seen. They weren't fighting to win the galaxy, they were fighting to make everyone see the absurdity of it. All they had won, not because they had defeated the Empire, but because they had made the Empire question its own place in the universe. And so as the Empire's fleet continued its beautiful dance through space, the humans joined in their ships, performing their own ridiculous dance moves alongside them. The battle was over, but it wasn't a loss, it wasn't a victory, it was just a moment in time where the Empire learned that sometimes the greatest power isn't in strength or control, but in the ability to laugh at yourself.